So the other night, my fiance and I sat down and watched the phenomenal Millie Vanilli documentary on Paramount Plus. And, you know, like any good doc, it essentially uncovered the quote-unquote untold story, as it has far more depth than just two European guys faking out the world by lip-syncing to songs that they essentially had nothing to do with whatsoever. That being said, though, it most certainly left me with more questions than answers. So with that, let's dive in. And also, towards the end of the video, I do want to share a somewhat shocking revelation. I don't mean to sound like one of those cringy YouTubers that are like, hey guys, make sure you stick around to the end. But seriously, stick around. I definitely found something very interesting while I was writing this video. But all right, enough of that. Here we go. First off, before we really get into some of the questions that I was left with, I want to give just a real quick summary of the Millie Vanilli backstory in case you haven't watched it. So I guess you could say this is a spoiler warning, I guess, if there's really such a thing for a documentary on a story that has actually been told prior to it coming out. Essentially, Rob and Fab, quote unquote, make up Millie Vanilli, and they're two broke kids in their early 20s with aspirations of being famous when they end up meeting producer Frank Farian, and he ends up offering them a contract that they sign without any sort of legal representation. They basically didn't even read it themselves, which shame on them for sure, only to find out that they won't be singing on any of the songs. They will really only be dancing and essentially the faces of the group, which ended up turning into Millie Vanilli. Eventually, from there, with the release of Girl You Know It's True and other singles, notably Blame It on the Rain and Baby Don't Forget My Number, which, let's be honest, they're all bangers. I mean, I'm not even kidding. Those songs are awesome. But anyways, due to those songs, Millie Vanilli skyrocketed to stardom, even winning a Grammy. But eventually, when they allegedly demanded an extra $150,000, I think it was from their producer, Frank, he ended up outing the whole project, announcing that it was all fake, and it was other musicians' voices on the recordings, which, of course, sparked worldwide outrage to the point that there were those big steamrollers crushing copies of Millie Vanilli albums, although at that time there was already a fair bit of speculation that at least something sketchy was going on with Millie Vanilli. I think also at that time you were able to take your albums back to the store for a refund, if I'm not mistaken, but don't quote me on that one. One quick thing, too, that I did find to be really, really funny in the documentary is Rob, who tragically passed away, which I'll get into in a minute, but at one point, I guess, when they were superstars, he complained, I think it was to the producer, to turn up his vocal on the song, which obviously is ironic because his vocals are not even, they're nowhere on any of the recordings. But that's, you know, how much it really went to their heads, the fact that he's demanding that they turn his vocal track up when he's not even singing, which, oh my God, unbelievable. As it turns out, though, Millie Vanilli was not the first act that Frank had created and done the whole lip-syncing thing with, as there was another act throughout the 70s and 80s called Boney M, where Frank pulled the exact same stunt that he did with Millie Vanilli, but luckily for Frank, it never reached the heights of popularity that MV did. In the wake of the whole lip sync scandal, Rob and Fab essentially faded into obscurity for the most part, and Rob, as I mentioned earlier, would tragically pass away in 1998 from an overdose. The ending of the doc shows Fab singing Millie Vanilli songs live on stage, which is sort of what I wanted to talk about at the end of the video, but proving that he can in fact sing, or at least now he can sing. I do believe in the doc he says at the time neither of them could sing, but now Fab can definitely sing. There are a few moments throughout the documentary, though, where Rob and Fab were asked on the spot during a TV interview to sing live. And in all honesty, props to them. They did do it, and it was pretty decent. And I do feel that they could have performed the Millie Vanilli songs live back in those days, or at the very, very least on the records, and then use a track, which, of course, back in those days was frowned upon, but now it's common practice. However, that brings up two major questions for me. The obvious one is, how does it feel now knowing the state that music is in and everybody's singing to a track? And two, why wouldn't Frank Farian let them sing on the project to begin with? Real quick here, I got to give a shout out to Mammoth Headwear for sponsoring this video, because maybe you're like me, you have a ginormous head, you can't ever find a hat to fit your head properly. Well, look no more, check out Mammoth Headwear. I'm actually wearing a Mammoth hat right now, and it truly does fit like a dream. When I was a kid, I always wanted to wear a hat, and I never could, because truthfully, not a single hat would fit me until I found Mammoth Headwear. You can check out the link below and use promo code Logan at checkout for 10% off your order. And it's not just hats either. They got all sorts of stuff like shirts, hoodies, beanies, all that kind of stuff. Mammoth Headwear is the undisputed place to go if you have a ginormous head like I do. All right, starting with my first question, and forgive me as I'm definitely going to sound a lot like Eddie Trunk here, but nowadays practically everyone is singing to a track, not even singing at all, especially with pop acts, and now basically every single performance that you see on TV, whether it's SNL or the Super Bowl or a talk show, whatever, it's almost like it's an unspoken rule now that you can't perform live on a television broadcast. Sure, you could make the argument that at least so-and-so is lip-syncing to their own voice, or at least that's what we're led to believe. Who's to say there's not another Millie Vanilli situation right now? But even then, it's still not their song. A vast majority of artists in almost every single mainstream genre, whether it's hip-hop, pop, country, whatever, they have 1,000 writers on one fucking song. Now, of course, it's not all artists, but most. It takes a small army to churn these over-the-top, repetitive songs out. Now, look, I certainly don't think that Rob and Fab are completely innocent here, as obviously they were in on the whole scam and hardcore played into the lie and kept it going, which is pretty shitty. But look at the position that they were in at the time. Dead broke, with big dreams, young kids. I think most people would do that if they were put into that exact same situation. Not saying that I agree with what they did. It's a bit fucked up. But at the end of the day, it's not like they hurt anybody. I mean, look at actors or something. 9 out of 10 times they're acting something out that somebody wrote and told them what to do, a director. I mean, yes, a lot of actors definitely have some creative input oftentimes, but most actors, they're just doing somebody else's creation. The only reason they're doing it is because they're better looking than the person that wrote it. I also do find it to be quite unfair, and I think this was touched on in the doc a little bit, that those guys, Rob and Fab, were really the only ones to receive any backlash whatsoever. Frank Farian didn't really catch any heat. Clive Davis and Arista Records certainly didn't receive hardly any heat at all. It was just Rob and Fab, which I think is absolutely ridiculous, especially when you consider the relatively small role that Rob and Fab had in this. Like I said, they were really just the faces, like spokesmen, essentially. The label was really the one pushing this thing and rolling in the dough from a lie. Not that Rob and Fab weren't either, but again, they're really just the faces of Millie Vanilli. They were not the backbone of the operation. As far as why Frank didn't want them to sing, Fab, I believe, said it was because they were European, and Frank felt that to break this project huge in America, the project needed to have singing voices that sounded American, but honestly, that whole thing just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. I think that my biggest problem with that is that there's so many artists out there across all genres that are European or really just anywhere from outside the U.S., and you would really have no idea where they're from if you didn't look it up. I mean, look at AC/DC, Ozzy, even somebody like Adele, who I love, by the way. In my opinion, and to my ears, I don't hear them and then automatically think, yeah, they must be from overseas. That's fucking delusional. Not to mention, it's not like they did very much to hide the fact that they're European. During interviews that they did over here and on MTV and stuff, it was beyond clear that they're European. Very, very thick accents. To me, it doesn't make any sense at all. I understand that maybe at the time they weren't the greatest singers, although if I recall, they had a little thing going before they signed with Frank where they were dancing as well as singing. But I just feel like had Frank actually spent time helping them to develop their voice, this thing could have gone on quite a bit longer than for the short few years that it did, and everyone could have continued making money because at that point, Millie Vanilli was a literal money-making machine in those days. Something that is pretty fascinating about this documentary, though, is that, you know, it paints producer Frank Farian in a pretty bad light, but despite that, I guess he still had to sign off on the documentary, or at least for a major portion of it, which obviously he did. It's out now. It's been out for like a week or so. But he was also supposed to appear in the doc for an interview. But according to Luke Korem, the director, he kept stringing them along. And so eventually it just got to the point where they had to move on without him. Frank's assistant Ingrid, though, was very present throughout the documentary. And at one point back in the day, she was also romantically involved with Rob. And she was also the one that found him dead in his hotel room in Germany back in '98. I do wish, though, that she would have sort of explained her entire role in the whole scam, or at least given her thoughts on it now, looking back a little bit more, as she was there every single step of the way. But nonetheless, it was great to have her in the film, especially since it didn't end up working out with Frank. Okay, now for the shocking revelation. Before we wrap up this video, while I was writing this, I stumbled across footage of FAB performing live, quote unquote. And man, I gotta tell you, as much as this bums me out, I do believe that FAB was indeed lip syncing in this clip, which I'm gonna show in a second. But before I do, and mind you, this clip's I'm only gonna show like 2-3 seconds. That's all you need to see. I believe that the recording is most likely his voice. I don't think anyone is that stupid to relive what happened all those years ago, but it does seem like his mic is turned off while the song is going. I could be wrong. I'm purely speculating here, but that is what it looks like to me. But what I will say is either way, that dude definitely has some huge balls to even get back up on stage after the whole debacle back in the 90s. But anyways, check out this footage and let me know what you think down below in the comments. Either way, though, director Luke Korem did a phenomenal job putting this thing together. Definitely worth your time if you have Paramount Plus. And no, I unfortunately am not getting paid to plug this movie. It really just was that great of a watch, honestly. Definitely worth your time. All right, though, I gotta run because my fiance just realized that we made a bit of a mess last night, and I just gotta tell her, baby, blame it on my aim. Yeah, yeah. So I gotta go. But thanks so much for watching. Feel free to subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks to Mammoth Headwear for sponsoring this video, and I will see you next time.